All right, ladies, good afternoon. This screencast is going to cover the beginning of Chapter 7. So before you go any further, you need to pause the screencast and download the Chapter 7 outline if you haven't done so already, because that is newly added to Moodle. So we're going to continue talking about the process in which the colonies are no longer resisting England, but full-on revolting and rebelling against England. And the next set of notes is going to focus on the Townsend Acts. So despite the fact that the Whig Party in England is more sympathetic to the colonists, they still sought to increase government revenue and money through a series of new taxes on trade. They're still in debt. They still need to raise money. So they are going to pass a new series of taxes named after Charles Townsend, who is the new Chancellor of Exchequer. You don't have to know that, but he's basically kind of the person in charge of implementing taxes. He kind of sees over the financial side of England's government. And so he's going to usher in a new series of taxes that are going to be named the Townsend Acts after him. These acts will place a tax on things like paper, paint, glass, and tea that were imported into the colonies. So they are a series of like trading or tariffs, trading taxes or tariffs. So put a tax on paper, paint, glass, and tea. Again, in terms of resistance, America is once again going to debate and resist these laws. There's going to be another boycott of British goods issued by the Sons of Liberty. That radical group is back to some of their own tactics. The colonies are becoming more united overall, and Parliament is getting a little annoyed with the colonies, particularly with the city of Boston, since that seems to be where the majority of the rebellious activity is taking place. So Parliament does begin kind of increasing the amount of British troops that are sent into Boston, just to keep and maintain overall British control of that region. But the colonial boycotts are hurting British merchants, and so the British merchants will once again ask Parliament, please repeal these acts. They are not beneficial to us. The colonists are boycotting our goods when we continue to tax them. Parliament will realize the Townsend Acts are just not favorable or working for them at this time. They will choose to remove the taxes from all items of the Townsend Acts except for tea. Tea will be the only part of the act that will remain a taxed item, and this is Parliament's way of showing and displaying their power over the colonies. Colonial merchants will begin purchasing British goods again, but they will drink smuggled tea to avoid the tea tax, or they will choose to boycott tea altogether, which was a struggle for an Englishman because they do love their tea. All right, so when the Townsend duties were in place, there were potentially harsh resistance to these taxes in Boston specifically. And so because of this, like I said, England had started increasing the number of British soldiers that were in Boston to keep and maintain the order. And as you can imagine, that increases the tension between the British troops that are stationed in Boston and the colonists themselves. Just overall, a lot of hostility between general colonists and the British soldiers present there. So on one particular day, colonists are going to kind of gather outside of the Boston Customs House where British soldiers are located, and they will taunt and jeer and throw things like rocks and snowballs at the British troops that were outside of the Boston Customs House. And what we know is that a British soldier's gun went off during this kind of exchange. We really don't know if this was on purpose or by mistake, because at first one shot was fired. And in theory, since they were being harassed, it could have been like their finger was on the trigger and it was just an accident. But the one shot does confuse the rest of the soldiers there, who begin shooting into the crowd. And 5 colonists are killed because of that exchange of fire. including, and I don't have his name on the screen, I realize. I wonder if I can write it while recording. That would be helpful. Let's see. Yeah, Crispus Attucks. Okay, he is, sorry, my handwriting's so bad, it's a P, not a, I don't even know what letter that should look like, but that's a P. He is one of the colonists that was killed in this exchange, and he was actually a fugitive slave and a known agitator. So he's kind of considered now that we look back at history to be one of the first people killed in the American Revolution, even though the revolution hasn't officially begun yet. Some historians call him that. But nonetheless, he's just one of 5 colonists that were exchanged, or that were killed in this event. Now, Paul Revere, who's going to become a known patriot of this time, he will make an engraving of this event. And Samuel Adams will make posters of the engraving. You see that engraving here, by the way, on the screen and the poster. And they will be the ones to label this event as the Boston Massacre. And it's kind of used as a piece of propaganda against the British. And we'll kind of talk about this piece of art a little bit in class tomorrow. So I'm going to come back to this, but just know that Revere and Adams are the ones who circulate this kind of representation of the Boston Massacre. They're the ones who name it that. And just know what really actually happened in the event, with 5 colonists ending up dead, including Crispus Attucks. The last thing I want to talk about today, before we'll just save the rest for tomorrow in class, is the Tea Act and the Boston Tea Party. So, the British East India Company is a British merchant company. British East India is the name. And they were in financial trouble and they need some help. So in order to kind of give that specific merchant group some help, England is going to pass what is called the Tea Act. The Tea Act was designed and aimed at giving the British East India Company advantages in the colonial tea market. It kind of granted the East India Company to have a monopoly on the North American tea trade. They basically made the tea purchased from this specific company cheaper than all other tea, not fully removing the tax on tea that was still put on place by the Townsend Acts, but just making it overall more affordable. The British East India Company would also get to sell directly to shopkeepers in the colonies. They were able to cut out colonial merchants from, like the merchants would no longer purchase from the seller and then sell to the store like you would sell directly from ship to store, making it cheaper overall, making it more competitive, and that's kind of what provides its monopoly, because most colonists would be inclined to buy this type of tea, since it's going to save them money. Now, believe it or not, even though this has made colonial tea now more affordable, this angers many of the colonists because it hurts the business of the merchants who would purchase the tea from the actual tea company. And it also hurt the business of tea smugglers who had been making their profits off of illegally purchased tea when the tax was still high and in place. And colonists would choose to smuggle in their tea instead of paying it because they didn't want to pay the increased price. But really the colonists are just angry that England's only passing this act not to give them an advantage, but to give their own merchant group an advantage, their own business an advantage. So the Sons of Liberty kind of react to this in a negative way, kind of acting out in favor of the merchants. They start to not allow the British East India Company's ships to be able to dock and unload their goods in the Boston Harbor. If they can't dock their boats, then they can't unload their goods. But one ship is eventually able to dock, and the Sons of Liberty will disguise themselves as Mohawk Indians. They will sneak onto the ship. They will pour 45 tons of tea, which equals to something close to 90,000 pounds of tea into the Boston Harbor, which is just very wasteful of tea, of course, and that event is known as the Boston Tea Party. This will also spark protests in other colonies as well. as they will respond not exactly as radically as the Sons of Liberty did in Boston, but they will want to react in a negative way and act out against the Tea Act in other colonies. So England is not going to be very happy with Boston or the colony of Massachusetts, and they will be punished, and we will talk about their punishment tomorrow. So if you have any questions, please write them down. I know I did go fast this afternoon, but I'm happy to explain anything in class, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good day.